welcome to our first joint hearing, this joint committee hearing, this Congress, entitled Heroes at Home, Improving Services for Veterans and Their Caregivers. It's been more than a decade since the Aging Committee held a joint hearing, and I want to thank Senator Tester and Senator Moran for bringing together our two committees today to examine the important issues and unique challenges faced by veterans and their caregivers. I also want to note that Senator Scott, a member of our Aging Committee, will be serving as the ranking member for the Aging Committee hearing today that's part of this joint hearing, and I'm grateful for his leadership in acting in that capacity. Our conversation today is particularly timely given that tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of D-Day, commemorating the Allied invasion of Normandy during World War II. We thank those service members who fought on that day, and obviously just saying that doesn't convey anywhere near the depth of our gratitude for all that they did to save our country and to literally save the world. And we, of course, extend that thanks to those who are serving today, all members of the armed forces, for the work they do every day protecting our nation. Veterans and their families make great sacrifices to serve our country. Our duty as members of the Senate is to provide support to those who serve our country. We must provide care for those who return home from service with injuries, both mental and physical, and for those who face disease or illness later in life. Today's hearing is about the military family and paid caregivers who uphold this duty to provide invaluable long-term care to veterans. Joining us today are some of the most resilient people in the nation, both our veterans and their caregivers, the caregivers who provide unwavering support to the men and women who served in the armed forces. I've said this before, we cannot claim to be the greatest country in the world if we do not have the greatest caregiving in the world, and that includes supporting the military families and their paid caregivers. Military caregivers come in many different forms: spouses, family, friends, neighbors, and paid workers. The majority, actually more than 96% of those caregivers are women. And we'll hear from our witnesses today that caring for a loved one can place a significant physical, emotional, and financial stress on the veteran, the caregiver, and family members. Additional challenges for caregivers include navigating the VA system, applying for programs, and finding other resources. We'll hear today from Peter Townsend, who comes to us from Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. He's joined by his wife and caregiver, Lisa, and we'll hear from them about the needs and the needs and the experience of being a care recipient and what that care means to his continued quality of life and health. Long-term care is intended to provide supports and services to help people live independently and as safely as possible in the setting of their choice. Caregiving services may include, of course, help with activities of daily living, managing medications, transportation, and so much more. The VA offers a wide range of long-term care programs, providing a model of how to honor the desires of those who want to continue living independently in their homes and in their communities. For example, many veterans rely on VA respite care, so caregivers can take a much needed time off for themselves or home health aid services to help them in their homes. Excuse me. While the VA offers options and supports for veterans and their caregivers, we'll hear from our witnesses today that we must do an awful lot more. We must strengthen the long-term care supports that are currently available and help more caregivers access these services. That's why I'm proud to support bipartisan and bicameral legislation to expand veterans' access to long-term care services and supports through the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act. I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Tester, Senator Moran, and Senator Hassan for leading on this important effort. The VA's program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, known as PCAFC, is an important support for family caregivers. It has, however, had challenges over the past decades. As the program has been reconfigured, too many veterans and their caregivers have been denied benefits. This is not a new problem. In 2017, the Senate Aging Committee held a hearing on military caregivers. During that hearing, two of my constituents, Wanda and Samuel Ickes, discussed how the VA pushed them out of the Family Caregivers Program. In response to those concerns, I released a report on the program entitled Discharged and Denied. My report found that the VA failed to anticipate the need of the Caregivers Program, then abruptly discharged thousands of veterans, all without oversight or a clear appeals process. Now that veterans of all eras are eligible for the Family Caregivers Program, the VA must not repeat its earlier mistakes. The VA should act swiftly to ensure the program benefits every single family it was meant to serve. With the recent passage and implementation of the PACT Act, we've seen the largest health care and benefit expansion in the VA's history. The PACT Act expanded access to health care for veterans who experienced toxic exposures in the Vietnam, Gulf War, and post-9/11 eras, which has now helped grant 1 million claims to veterans. We need to make sure the VA has the resources it needs to support these newly enrolled veterans and their caregivers. And finally, we need to make sure the VA's resources are accessible to those who are they're designed to serve. As chairman of this committee, the Aging Committee, I've pushed to make the VA make its websites and technology accessible for people with disabilities, including injured service members as required by law. I'm pleased that the VA has made progress, but more work remains to be done. I'm working with Senator Scott to pass Senate Bill 2516, the Veterans Accessibility Act, which will require the VA to establish a Veterans Advisory Committee on Equal Access to evaluate the VA's compliance with all federal disability laws. I want to thank Senator Scott for your support on the Veterans Accessibility Act and to the Dole Foundation for endorsing the bill. But thank you for that. We have our work cut out for us, obviously. We need to uphold our duty, and it is our duty, to support our veterans and their families. We need to make sure the programs designed to serve them are working as intended, and we need to make sure VA resources are accessible. We need to take our lessons learned from the VA to ensure that all who provide long-term care support and services, whether they're military or civilian, family members or direct care workers, we need to make sure that these individuals are valued and are compensated for their work. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about their essential work and how Congress, and especially the Senate, can better support our nation's military caregivers and their family. Before I turn to Chairman Tester, I'm going to run out because I have to go to a Judiciary Committee to introduce a judge for a brief period of time, and I'll be running back, so I'll miss Chairman Tester's opening, but I'll make sure that I tune into C-SPAN to see it. Thank you, Chairman Tester.
And we will miss you for a few minutes. Thank you, Chairman Casey, and I want to thank Senator Scott for being here from the Aging Committee, for jointly convening this important hearing with the Veterans Affairs Committee to discuss veterans caregivers. Look, over the years, I've worked with leadership of these committees on several important initiatives related to caregivers, including the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act with Ranking Member Moran and Chairman Casey, and the CARE Act with Ranking Member Braun. Today, we hope to get additional feedback and direction from our witnesses to guide these and future efforts. So I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. You're critically important in this process. I especially want to welcome Hannah Nieskins. Sorry about that, Hannah. She is from the metropolis of Cardwell, Montana. Hannah cares for her husband, Kelly, who was injured while serving in the Montana Army National Guard back in 2005. That means that Hannah's been Kelly's primary caregiver for nearly 20 years while raising 3 kids and working at the Whitehall School District. Hannah, I want to thank you for everything you do. You are an inspiration to the folks on this side of the dais. Our caregivers do their jobs every single day, providing critical care and support to veterans when they need it most. But for them to get the support and assistance they truly need, Congress needs to do its job. I want to note I'd like to note that the House is currently deliberating the path forward on a package of bills negotiated by the Senate and House Veterans Affairs Committee, named the Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act. This is comprehensive legislation that would expand access to home and community-based care programs for our veterans and bolster home health care staffing, attempts to strengthen the VA caregiver and long-term care programs. I look forward to getting this piece of legislation done by working with the Dole Foundation, who has been a long-time champion of these issues and this legislation. I look forward to working with the veteran service organizations to finally get this over the finish line on behalf of our nation's caregivers. Why? Because our veterans have earned this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Scott for his remarks.
Thank you, Chair Tester. Good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and want to welcome you all to this historic joint meeting of the Senate Aging and Veteran Affairs Committees. I want to thank Chairman Casey and Tester, as well as Ranking Members Braun and Moran, for having this hearing today. It's an honor to stand in for Ranking Member Braun today, especially on an issue so personal to me and my family and millions of Americans nationwide. I would like to put in Senator Braun's, Ranking Member Braun's testimony into the record.
Without objection.
This hearing is an important opportunity to hear about some key issues affecting veterans receiving care and their caregivers as they age. As a Navy veteran, the son of a World War II veteran, I know firsthand the sacrifices made by our military members and their families. I think about my dad, Orba. He had a 6th grade education and joined the Army as a teenager, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and did all combat jumps in World War II with the 82nd Airborne. He flew into Normandy that morning. He didn't talk about his service a lot, but he was so proud to be in the U.S. Army, proud to wear the uniform and defend our freedoms. He told me the Germans were bad, the food was bad, the foxholes were bad, so I joined the Navy. None of the opportunities and freedoms we have as Americans would be possible without the dedicated services of our brave heroes like my father and those who have served. That's why throughout my time as governor of Florida, I made it my mission to turn our state into the most active duty military and veteran-friendly state in the nation by championing important legislation and funding to support priorities that matter most to Floridians, Florida's active duty military and veterans families. Fighting for our heroes continues to be one of our top priorities as a U.S. Senator. I always do everything I can to support our veterans and their families so they can succeed and pursue their dreams in our state. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor and supporter of dozens of veterans-related bills in the Senate, including the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act, the Major Richard Starr Act, and the PACT Act. Our veterans showed up for our nation and sacrificed so much. It's so important that we show up, support them after their service, and make sure they have every resource they need. It's also imperative today to recognize the critical role played by our country's 5.5 million military caregivers, who range from spouses, parents, children, friends, and family members, who dedicate their lives and often give up so much to care for those who served our country. I have the greatest honor of serving as United States Senator and representing our veterans, honorable caregivers, hardworking Florida families, and their American people. Thank you, Chair Tester.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. I thank you and the ranking member, Senator Scott, for leading this hearing today, and I welcome our witnesses and look forward to their testimony. Caregivers, who are often overlooked and forgotten, simply have a profound impact on our nation's veterans. They are invaluable in making certain that veterans with even the most complex conditions receive the care and dignity that they deserve. It's disheartening to hear too frequently from dedicated caregivers in Kansas and elsewhere about the numerous obstacles they face in dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I've heard from caregivers who were denied services from the VA Family Caregivers Program for vague reasons, and in some cases were only given a one-sentence explanation. In far too many cases, and a lot of what I know about this is what veterans and their caregivers tell me and what casework we do in our office to try to solve those problems. Far too often, in these cases, the VA is failing to provide families with a clear, detailed explanation of how to appeal a VA decision or what other VA programs and services they might be eligible for. This leaves the caregiver and veteran alike in limbo, uncertain how to get the support they so desperately need. Congress expanded the Family Caregiver Program to veterans of all ages in the Mission Act, which was signed into law 6 years ago tomorrow. While I expect there to be growing pains, that's to be expected, when the VA is implementing new legislation, it's always disappointing to hear that the expanded family caregiver program is not in a better place than it is today. As we continue to wait for the VA to issue new regulations, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the family caregiver program, how it must evolve to provide caregivers and veterans the support they need. I introduced the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act, which would address the needs of veterans, caregivers, and their families. This legislation, if implemented correctly, would make it easier for veterans to stay at home as they age by expanding and improving the VA's home and community-based programs. Almost half of VA patient population is over 65, and we know an increasing number of those veterans want to live at home, surrounded by their families, in their communities, and loved ones, rather than the transition into a nursing home. VA should honor veteran preferences when, where, and how to receive care. I also look forward to discussing how Congress and the VA can better support state veteran homes, which play a critical role in caring for veterans across the country. We have 2 in our state, and we're trying to develop a 3rd, and the process we're going through to accomplish that 3rd one is amazingly slow. Again, thanks to our witnesses and to my colleagues on the Aging and Veterans Affairs Committees for being here today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
I want to thank both you and Congressman Scott for your testimonies. What?
Senator.
Oh, Jesus Christ. You didn't. You skipped that, as I did. Thank you very much, Senator Scott. Sorry about that. I'm going to introduce the first witness today, and then we'll introduce the second ones before they come up to speak. The first witness is from Casey Country. His name is Peter Townsend. He's from Auburn Township in the great state of Pennsylvania. Mr. Townsend served in the United States Army on active duty from 1982 to 1986. He later worked as a physician assistant until early retirement in 2014. Sorry, Bobby, I'm taking your thunder. In 2014, due to complications from primary progressive multiple sclerosis. He is accompanied by his wife, Lisa, who serves as his full-time caregiver. I want to thank you both for being here today. And unless Bob has something he'd like to add, you can progress with your testimony, Mr. Townsend.
Thank you. Chairmans Casey and Tester, ranking members Braun and Moran, and distinguished members of the committees. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding my experiences with caregiver support services available through the VA. My name is Peter Townsend. I'm currently 60 years old and live in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania with my wife, Lisa, who is also my caregiver. I served on active duty in the United States Army from 1982 to 1986. Following my discharge in 1986, I went on to work for over 2 decades as a physician assistant before retiring prematurely due to complications of multiple sclerosis. As my disease progressed, I began to experience significant difficulties with mobility, fatigue, cognition, and bowel and bladder dysfunction, among others. Today, I rely upon a power wheelchair when out in the community and a walker to ambulate for short distances at home. Through conversations with fellow veterans, I learned that MS was a medical condition that the VA recognized as a service-connected disease, and with the assistance of Paralyzed Veterans of America, of which I am a member, I was able to successfully file a claim and am now rated 100% service-disabled due to MS. As my symptoms progressed, I began to rely more on the assistance of my wife, Lisa. My MS can vary dramatically. Although most days are good days where I can function fairly independently, when I have a flare or exacerbation, I can become temporarily incapacitated. During these times, I rely very heavily upon Lisa for assistance with a variety of activities to include intermittent catheterization, transfers, toileting, personal hygiene, dressing, and meal preparation. I've had no fewer than 3 of these episodes already this year. Prior to leaving the workforce, Lisa had been working as a case manager for Keystone Community Resources. Eventually, as my condition deteriorated, Lisa decided to retire early from her position at age 61 to become my full-time caregiver. Around this time, primarily through a process of self-education and online resources, we learned of the VA's Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, the PCAFC. We applied when eligibility opened to veterans of all service areas in October 2022. Unfortunately, our application was denied. As I understand it, we were denied due to the VA's determination that I did not require assistance with the performance of certain activities of daily living each time that activity was performed, or that the level of assistance did not, quote, rise to the level required to participate in the PCAFC, end quote. This strict interpretation of the eligibility criteria by the VA is of particular concern to veterans like myself, with medical conditions whose symptoms are highly variable and unpredictable. Lisa was eventually enrolled into the Program of General Caregiver Support Services, the PGCSS. However, this transition to the PGCSS was not automatic, and we went for some time thinking we were enrolled in the general program, although we were not. One of the most valuable benefits of the Program of Comprehensive Assistance is the availability of medical insurance coverage for caregivers through the Civilian Health and Medical Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, CHAMP-VA. CHAMP-VA was the only way that we could afford for Lisa to retire early. Lisa qualified for coverage due to my permanent and total disability rating, so we did not have to rely upon the PCAFC for this benefit. The Program of General Caregiver Support Services offers fewer benefits than the PCAFC, but one significant benefit it does offer is respite care. We utilized this benefit when Lisa underwent surgery. Staff at the Wilkes-Barre VA arranged for me to be admitted to the Community Living Center for 3 weeks while Lisa recovered from her surgery. Lisa knew that regardless of what was happening with my health, I was being cared for so that she could focus on her recovery. I can't emphasize enough how important this valuable, how valuable the respite care benefit was to our family, and is comforting to know that it will be there if we need it again in the future. Throughout this journey, our goal has been to create an environment that allows me to live in our home as long as possible and to avoid the need for long-term care. Participation in VA's caregiver programs helps us to achieve that goal. The reality is that my current level of disability is such that I'm no longer able to live independently and would require placement in an assisted living facility were it not for Lisa's efforts. I would like to make it clear that Lisa and I remain very grateful for all the benefits that we have received and continue to receive. To show my gratitude, I currently serve as a Red Coat Ambassador at the Wilkes-Barre VA Medical Center. By volunteering, I can help other veterans connect to and navigate services more seamlessly and give back to the organization that has done so much for me. The system is not perfect, however, and there will always be room for improvement. I encourage the committees to work with the VA to, one, ensure a more seamless transition to the PGCSS following denial of the PCAFC. 2, to better communicate resources and benefits available to veterans. And 3, value the work of caregivers by passing legislation which would give Social Security credit to caregivers who have left the workforce prematurely to care for their loved ones. I thank you for this opportunity to share our experiences and look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Mr. Townsend, thanks for your testimony. We're grateful that you're here. I'll turn next to Chairman Tester for his introduction, and then we'll alternate. We'll do the introductions first, and then we'll turn to our next witness for testimony. But Chairman Tester.
So our next witness is Hannah Neiskens. Hannah is, as I said in my opening statement, joining us from Cardwell, Montana. One of the most beautiful places on earth, I might add. Her husband sustained traumatic brain injury while serving in Iraq, and she serves as his caregiver full-time. She is an Elizabeth Dole Foundation alumna and is an advocate and spokesperson about mental health issues associated with brain injuries. And I just want to say, Hannah, it's not a short trip from Montana to Washington, D.C., and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Tester. Our third witness is Andrea Sawyer. Andrea is an advocacy navigator for the Quality of Life Foundation's Wounded Veteran Family Care Program. After her husband sustained injuries in Iraq, she became his caregiver and an advocate for for other wounded warrior families. We want to thank you for being here today and sharing your experiences with us. I'll turn next to Ranking Member Scott, I guess I can call you that today, for the next introduction.
I have the privilege of introducing Fred Ganga, the Executive Director of the Long Island State Veterans Home at Stony Brook University, a 350-bed skilled nursing facility serving honorably discharged veterans and their families. Fred also serves as the first Vice President for the National Association of State Veterans Homes and is a board member of the National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners. Thanks for being here.
And our fourth and final witness is Ms. Meredith Beck. Meredith is the National Policy Director for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. She's dedicated over 20 years to the veteran, caregiver, and military communities. We appreciate you being with us today. We'll turn for testimony to Ms. Neiskens.
Chairman Casey and Tester, ranking members Moran and Scott, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Hannah Neiskens, and I have been married to my husband, Kelly, for 20 years. For 18 and a half of those years, I've also been his caregiver. In 2005, Kelly was a 23-year-old Montana Guardsman activated to Army infantrymen deployed to Forward Operating Base McHenry in Hawija, Iraq. On May 4th, 2005, during a routine patrol, Kelly's Humvee was struck by a large IED. This explosion, the fifth roadside bomb to hit his vehicle since his arrival in November, left the Humvee disabled in an 11-foot wide crater and knocked the squad members, including Kelly, unconscious. Upon regaining consciousness and exiting the vehicle, they came under heavy sniper fire. Kelly was struck by a large caliber rifle round that traveled through his ribs, hit his armored plates, and ricocheted multiple times through his torso before lodging near his spine. He survived thanks to the extraordinary efforts of medics, doctors, and the evac team. Upon returning to civilian life, Kelly faced numerous physical limitations. He had mobility issues caused by traumatically herniated discs, as well as nerve damage, pain, and neurogenic bowels caused by scar tissue around his spine and intestines. He suffered from migraines, seizures, and hearing loss. His cognitive impairments, including problems with executive functioning, memory deficits, and mood dysregulation, also pose significant challenges. In 2016, after a decade of limited success with medications prescribed to treat PTSD, an MRI performed through UCLA's Operation MEND program revealed 12 lesions on Kelly's brain, some as large as a dime, confirming a significant TBI for which both proper treatment and benefits had been delayed. Throughout the past 12 years, the VA's program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, the PCAFC, has been an invaluable resource for me as I navigated the complexities of Kelly's care and providing me training and support. In 2021, we were subjected to a grueling reassessment process for PCAFC eligibility. During a nearly 2-hour virtual appointment with a contracted occupational therapist, Kelly and I had to painfully recount every limitation he faces. I had to quantify everything I do as a caregiver, which after 2 decades of caregiving is difficult when those caregiving tasks are so integrated into our daily life. The resulting report was incomplete and inaccurate, missing critical information in VBA disability ratings. Despite efforts by the VA staff and me to correct these errors before review, not all were corrected. The reassessment outcome was that Kelly and I did not meet eligibility criteria, and I was dismissed from the program. The decision highlighted several issues. Significant discrepancies exist between the Veterans Benefits Administration and Veterans Health Administration records, leading to incomplete or incorrect ratings and disability information submitted in reassessment reports. For example, Kelly's VBA-rated disability of status post through and through gunshot wound injury, coded with a VBA diagnostic code for muscle injuries due to wounds caused by gunshots or other missiles, was recorded in his VHA records as superficial scars and back muscle impairment. As there was no equivalent diagnostic code in the VHA medical record system. His VBA rating for neurogenic bowel was recorded in the VHA system as irritable colon. Perhaps more importantly, his 70% rating for his TBI was completely missing in the VHA record as a rated service-connected disability. The reassessment process placed undue emotional strain and stress on us, and I believe reassessment should occur only when a veteran's needs change significantly. Additionally, veterans with specific VBA ratings, such as incompetency, aid in attendance, those should have presumptive eligibility for caregiving. It was also apparent that veterans with stable needs or those receiving private care were disadvantaged in reassessments due to fewer VHA medical records in the months preceding the evaluation. Stable needs does not equate to insignificant needs. Furthermore, veterans who reside in areas with limited access to specialists, such as where we reside in rural Montana, were penalized due to access issues, as they do not receive routine comprehensive evaluations involving multiple specialists. This May marked 19 years since Kelly's injury. Over these years, I have learned that aging significantly amplifies the challenges faced by people with disabilities. Withdrawing support for disabled veterans with high needs and their caregivers is incomprehensible. As the brain and body age, the need for consistent and comprehensive care for our veterans only intensifies. Removing caregivers from PCAFC could lead them to seek more expensive care options for their veterans, including home health aides through Medicare or the VA programs. Utilizing home health aides instead of caregivers exacerbates the significant nationwide shortage of home health aides. In addition, the availability of home health aides, especially in rural areas like our small Montana town, which has a population of 68, is none too few. Thank you for allowing me to share my story and the challenges we face. I appreciate your commitment to improving the lives of veterans and their caregivers. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Neeskens, thank you for being here with us today, and thanks for traveling to be here. It's a long distance, and grateful to have the benefit of your family story. Next, Ms. Sawyer.
Chairman Tester and Casey, Ranking Members Moran and Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Quality of Life Foundation, which serves caregivers of the seriously injured veterans. We create educational resources surrounding PCAFC and are one of the few organizations that assist with clinical appeals for PCAFC. Over the years, legislation and policy surrounding caregivers has evolved. The original legislation created the Caregiver Support Program for post-9/11 veterans. Post-9/11 veterans accepted into PCAFC under this regulation are called legacy caregivers. The Mission Act of 2018 expanded eligibility to PCAFC to veterans of previous generations. The VA drafted new regulations in 2020. By March of 2022, there was a high denial rate for eligible applicants from previous generations, around 70%, and legacy review denials were around 80%. VA paused legacy reassessments in March of 2022. Since then, VACO has rewritten the regulation, but no new regulation has been published. After the March 2022 SVAC hearing on PCAFC, VACO held collaborative sessions with VSOs to discuss what we saw as the problems with the regulation. However, in the fall of 2022, the VA Office of General Counsel stopped these conversations and declared VA within the confines of rulemaking. Since that time, VSOs have been given no guidance on what will be in the new regulation for the program. We asked the committees to work with VA and stakeholder organizations on the following items. Congress needs to clarify that the mission of PCAFC is to recognize the sacrifice of caregivers providing services for their seriously injured veterans. Services that would, in the absence of a family caregiver, would be required to be provided by the VA. Remind VA that the Caregiver Support Program was intended for the seriously injured, not the severely injured. codify that activities of daily living and supervision, protection, and instruction needs should only require regular assistance so that veterans are not denied PCAFC for attempting any level of independence within the areas in which they need assistance. Require that all veterans medical providers give input on a veteran's application for PCAFC and remove the language in the statute that states to the maximum extent possible when requiring such input. Require VHA to honor its duty to assist to collect outside medical records. Create a pathway to advocacy to require VA to develop a program to allow VSOs to navigate the Veterans Health Administration on behalf of veterans and caregivers. Mandate that those veterans and caregivers needing additional assistance beyond PCAFC are allowed to be presented with all of their potential options for care. All of these items are in the Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Health Care and Benefits Improvement Act, as well as listed between the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act and Senator Tester's CARE Act. Examine caregivers' financial security for post-caregiving. Senate Bill 3885, the Veteran Caregiver Re-Education, Reemployment, and Retirement Act, would create pathways for caregivers to re-enter the workplace and study allowing them to contribute to retirement accounts and Social Security so that they are not left destitute in their later years. When testifying before Congress, then VA Secretary Shulkin said that VA wanted to change PCAFC to align it with other VA programs. One lawmaker at the time responded, "I am concerned that VA may attempt to justify changes to the program at the expense of our most vulnerable veterans rather than working to expand the program." This is exactly what has happened. VA made the cheaper to run PCAFC harder to get into than the more expensive geriatrics and extended care programs. A PCAFC caregiver is paid between $8.60 an hour to $13.86 an hour. VA reimbursement rates for home health aides range from $31 an hour to $81 an hour. We are simply asking you to restore PCAFC to one that supports seriously injured veterans who have a need for assistance on a regular basis. Allowing family caregivers to supply this care in the home has proven to have better health outcomes for veterans as well as cost savings for the government. By passing the Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Health Care and Benefits Improvement Act and the Veteran Caregiver Re-Education, Reemployment, and Retirement Act, Congress would reinforce its support of veterans and their family caregivers and veterans' desire to age in place at home. Veterans have given their all to defend America. Shouldn't we honor their right to age in place at home with the caregivers of their choice? The Quality of Life Foundation thanks you for holding this hearing, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Ms. Sawyer, thank you for your testimony. We're grateful you're here. Next, Mr. Skanga. Appreciate it.
Chairman Casey and Testa, Ranking Members Scott and Moran, and members of the committees. Thank you for inviting the National Association of State Veterans Homes, better known as NASVA, to testify on ways to improve and expand support for aging veterans and their caregivers. As you know, NASVA is an all-volunteer organization representing the interest of all 165 state veterans homes, which combined operate 158 skilled nursing care programs, 47 domiciliary programs, 3 adult day health care, or ADHC programs. I am currently the legislative officer and past president of NASVA. However, my full-time job is executive director of the Long Island State Veterans Home at Stony Brook University, a 340-bed skilled nursing facility serving honorably discharged veterans and their families. Messrs. Chairman, state veterans homes provide approximately half of all federally supported institutional long-term care for veterans, yet we receive less than 20% of the VA's total nursing home care budget. It is clear that the state-home partnership provides a tremendous value for VA by leveraging matching state funding for the benefit of all the veterans we serve. Although the veteran population is projected to decline in future years, there will always be significant numbers of veterans who will need traditional nursing home care. While we agree that VA should continue to expand home and community-based care, It should be an addition to, not a subtraction from facility-based care. One of the most promising areas to expand home-based care is through the state-home adult day health care programs, which helps to maximize the veterans' independence and enhance their quality of life, as well as provide much-needed respite for the family caregivers. The Long Island State Veterans Home operates a 40-slot medical model adult day health care program serving 75 veterans 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. We provide them with a full array of clinical services offered at our skilled nursing facility, including physical, occupational, and speech therapies, nutritional counseling, meals, recreational therapy, as well as things like bathing, grooming, and hair care. We help stabilize chronic medical conditions, reduce emergency room visits and potential hospitalizations, delay or prevent nursing home placement, and provide significant respite for caregivers. In fact, we can save a caregiver multiple trips it would take to provide all the services that we are able to provide in one single visit at the State Veterans Home. Adult day health care programs can be a critical lifeline for both veterans and their caregivers, such as Colonel Mike Gable and his wife Janine. After graduating West Point and having a 27-year military career, Mike had a severe stroke, and for the next 2 years, he required hospital care. He faced the knowledge that he would need significant physical therapy and extensive support for the rest of his life. Fortunately, we were able to offer Mike the option of enrolling in our adult day health care program at the Long Island State Veterans Home. Today, he receives the intensive care and support he requires 5 days a week, while Janine, his spouse, was able to return to work as a school nurse, secure in the knowledge that her loved one is in good hands during the day and returns home to her every evening. Mr. Chairman, the biggest obstacle to states opening new adult day health care programs is the construction or modification of a facility. Unfortunately, current VA regulations only allow existing adult day health care programs to apply for construction grants. We urge Congress to enact legislation to allow State Home's construction grant program to be used to open new adult day health care programs. In addition, we urge you to work with VA so we can open satellite adult day health care programs that could offer life-changing service as an option to thousands of additional veterans and their family caregivers. NASVA also recommends that Congress create pilot programs to explore new arrangements for providing integrated home and community-based programs through and in partnership with the State Veterans Home program. For example, when I was forced to suspend my adult day health care program during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to quickly pivot to an innovative program that supported veterans at home by providing meals at home, PPE, telehealth, and home care visits. Finally, I want to thank Senators Tester and Moran for introducing legislation to create a pilot program to provide assisted living care for veterans, which includes state veterans homes. Mr. Chairman, state veterans homes can and must play a greater role in meeting the needs of aging veterans and their caregivers in partnership with the VA and other federal agencies. NASVA looks forward to continuing to work with you to ensure that our veterans have greater access to a full spectrum of long-term care options, whether at home or in the State Veterans Home program. That concludes my statement, and I would be pleased to answer any and all questions that the members of the committees may have. Thank you so much.
Mr. Skanga, thank you for your testimony. We'll conclude with Ms. Beck.
Thank you. Chairman Casey and Tester, ranking members Scott and Moran, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Meredith Beck, and I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, a national nonprofit whose mission it is to strengthen, empower, and support America's military and veteran caregivers. By working with these individuals every day, EDF is keenly aware of the challenges, issues, and remarkable strengths of the community we are honored to serve. While we have outlined additional issues for consideration here in our written testimony, we first want to focus on the urgency of the passage of H.R. 8371, the Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act mentioned previously. Clearly and without hesitation, the #1 priority of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is the immediate passage of this legislation. It is not an exaggeration to say that we hear from veterans and caregivers every day who are desperate for the support provided by the provisions in this bill. Every day we wait, their struggle continues. I will speak more about this legislation later in the statement. Regarding VA's program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, it remains a significant concern among all generations of veteran caregivers. We wish to strongly align ourselves with the comments and recommendations made by our partner, the Quality of Life Foundation, who has clearly articulated the program's current challenges in their written testimony. EDF is proud to sponsor the vital, specialized clinical appeals work done by QOL. With respect to the anticipated PCAFC regulations outlining new eligibility requirements, EDF notes that the legacy caregiver cohort yet again faces an uncertain future. Many of these caregivers have endured multiple pauses, regulation and leadership changes, and a lack of previous program standardization. The emotional toil and financial uncertainty caused by programmatic instability have weighed heavily on caregivers and veterans alike, as outlined by Hannah. Therefore, EDF asks Congress to work with relevant veteran service organizations to consider grandfathering this population, except in cases of fraud, waste, or abuse. This would allow the Caregiver Support Program to focus on its mission of supporting all generations rather than continuing this years-long division within the veteran caregiving community. We would like to commend CSP for their efforts to increase the use of respite services and the availability of mental health support for veteran caregivers enrolled in PCAFC. This has served as a lifeline for many who have previously struggled without access to care. Therefore, we encourage Congress to broaden access to mental health services to include those enrolled in the program of general caregiver support services. In addition to CSP, VA has many programs that, when accessed, benefit veteran caregivers. Where available, the Veteran-Directed Program, for example, has high satisfaction rates across the country. Unfortunately, despite being created more than 16 years ago and its demonstrated success, Veteran-Directed is still not available in every VA medical center. For example, Mary Ward, a Dole Caregiver Fellow, cares for Tom, her 100% service-disabled husband and 14-year ALS patient who receives care at the Durham VA. In 2019, almost 5 years ago, Mary found out another high-need veteran in the area was enrolled in Veteran-Directed and began the process of trying to get Tom enrolled. During the intervening years, she has been told repeatedly the program is still unavailable in Durham, again, despite knowing another veteran in the program. After significant effort on Mary's part and intervention from EDF, the VA reversed course, and Mary was told recently that they would try to enroll Tom. If enrolled, Mary will be able to hire her own familiar home health aides and respite care support to ensure they're meeting Tom's significant needs. This process should not and cannot be this difficult for veterans and caregivers. As a result of situations like Mary's and Tom's, Ranking Member Moran was joined by Chairman Tester and others to introduce S-141, the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act. In addition to mandating that every VA medical center provide the Veteran-Directed Program, the legislation takes a holistic approach to ensuring this and other relevant programs are offered nationwide, appropriately staffed, and communicated to caregivers. Most notably, the legislation increases expenditure cap for non-institutional care. This would allow the most vulnerable veterans and caregivers the support they need to stay in their homes. Fellow Laura Gary from Austin, Texas, who is present today in this hearing, cared for her 100% service-disabled husband, Tom, until his death in 2022. Because of the mandated cap, Laura constantly had to fight with the VA to get the appropriate support so Tom could continue to enjoy movie nights with the family, opening gifts on Christmas morning, and even their son's high school graduation, which happened in their living room, so that Tom could attend comfortably, all of which he would have missed if he were in the closest facility 2 hours away. It was Tom's greatest wish to be home with his family, and Laura fought every day until his death to make that possible. Eventually, this legislation, which enjoys broad bipartisan support in both houses of Congress, was included in the recently introduced and the previously mentioned H.R. 8371. This overall package includes numerous provisions designed to benefit veterans and caregivers. Despite strong support from the chairman and ranking members of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, as well as the chairman of the House Committee, all major veteran service organizations, and other advocacy groups, this legislation has seemingly fallen victim to the politics of the day and has been plagued by mischaracterization of its provisions. While caregivers and veterans still face significant challenges today, many can be addressed through continued oversight and the legislative initiatives mentioned in our written and oral statements. Therefore, EDF calls on Congress to come together, treat H.R. 8371 with the respect and urgency it deserves, and pass it without delay. Veterans and caregivers simply cannot wait any longer for this life-saving and life-saving provisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we look forward to your questions.
Ms. Beck, thank you for your testimony. Thank all of our witnesses. We'll turn to questions. I'll start. Mr. Townsend, I'm just grateful you're here and representing, in essence, the people of Pennsylvania and veterans. Appreciate your service in the United States Army, and I want to thank you for sharing the experiences that you've had and offering insights into how you and Lisa have navigated VA caregiving, so both services and supports. You shared that after an infection during an overseas tour in South Korea, you contracted a virus that is known to cause a progressive form of multiple sclerosis in some people. Unfortunately, you're now living with the daily challenges associated with MS. After a long battle with the VA, you were eventually deemed to have a 100% service-connected disability. Like so many others, you have good days and bad days. Even on your good days, you still require some level of assistance with your activities of daily living. You shared that you applied for the program of comprehensive assistance to family caregivers and were denied. How did this make you feel? What were you thinking when that determination was made? And do you feel that the VA's assessment adequately considered your needs?
Clearly, we were disappointed when we received the determination. It's certainly our opinion that the VA's current interpretation of the eligibility criteria eliminates many veterans like myself from participating in programs like the comprehensive program in particular, simply by not requiring assistance with certain activities of daily living each time that activity is performed. I clearly think there's room for improvement, and I think that was summarized best by Ms. Sawyer when she recommended the change to requiring regular assistance rather than assistance every single time a veteran performs that particular activity of daily living.
Thanks very much. I'll turn next to Ms. Neeskens. You as well shared your own story and that of your husband and the work you've done as a caregiver. In your testimony, you told us that professional home care workers are an essential part of your husband's care team and your support team. You also told us it's often hard to find and keep these workers. We hear about that a lot. This is a story that I hear all too frequently back home, and we hear it in Washington as well, that it really is a care crisis across the board, not just in this context, but in the context of children and seniors and veterans as well. I've introduced several bills to improve both recruitment and retention of direct care workers. These bills would benefit older adults and people with disabilities and would also support the family caregivers who are left with little support and without access to the services. I'd ask you to tell us what it means for you and your family when you're not able to find a home care worker. What steps can we take here in the Senate to make sure that a stable and qualified workforce is there for you and your family?
Yes, so the availability of home health aides there's, as everyone here knows, I believe, there's a nationwide shortage. I do believe the PCAFC helps to alleviate that burden by allowing family members to fill that gap when those HHAs are unable to be found. In addition, I think it's worth mentioning that the median wage for a home health aide in the United States is somewhere between $13 and $14 an hour. When you consider what that requires for someone to come to my home, the nearest metropolitan area to Cardwell is Butte, Montana, which has roughly 35,000 people. So that's probably where the home health aide would come from. They would have to commute 40 miles over the Continental Divide, over a very large pass in the middle of winter to come to my home to provide health aid services. The likelihood of finding someone who is willing to do that for $13.50 an hour is just slim to none. So I do believe that the PCAFC helps to alleviate those needs by allowing people that are already in the recipient's home or immediate community to fill those needs.
Thanks very much. I'll turn next to Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ganga, how does your facility assist veterans and their caregivers when the veteran wants to remain in the home but still needs some additional support?
So our adult day health care program is a phenomenal program. It allows for the veteran to keep his or her own physician, whether they be with VA or whether they be in the private community. We think we do provide a tremendous service to these veterans 6 days a week. I'd like to give you an example, Senator Scott. When the veteran is in our adult day health care program, it's a 6-hour visit. They arrive at 9 a.m. and they depart around 3 p.m. During the course of that time, we can get a lot done for that veteran. Think about someone who's caring for their elderly parent or grandparent who is a veteran. While they're at the home, they can receive phlebotomy because the doctor ordered a blood test. They can receive a simple X-ray or ultrasound. They can get their teeth examined and cleaned. They can get their eyes checked by our optometrist. They can receive podiatric care and even receive physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. Maybe their hearing aid needs a battery change. They can even get a haircut. What I just said to you, I just saved the caregiver about 11 trips in the community. That's what we tend to do in the State Veterans Home Program and our medical model adult day health care program. We are keeping veterans out of the emergency room, avoiding hospitalization, and we're certainly delaying placement into skilled nursing facilities. Thank you.
Thanks for what you do. Ms. Sawyer, what is the biggest challenge for caregivers in assessing benefits from the VA?
I'm going to assume you mean caregiver benefits, which are actually, caregiver benefits actually fall on the health care side. And some of the biggest problems with those really have to do with the evaluation itself. I would tell you that the law itself doesn't have many problems. The regulation itself has many problems, the implementing regulation. And one of those problems is the language that VA created around each and every time with ADL assistance. It prevents a veteran from showing any independence at all should they be able to toilet by themselves once in the entire 6 months. That prevents them from being eligible for each and every, for ADL assistance for that ADL because it doesn't meet the standard of each and every time. So one of the requests has been that the regulation be changed from each and every time. However, each and every time is actually in the regulation, not the law, but it was upheld by the courts. Because we have seen VA change this regulation multiple times, we've actually asked that Congress codify that it be regular instruction instead of how it's broadly worded in the law now. For supervision, protection, and instruction, that standard was also continuous daily care. A lawsuit, the veteran warrior lawsuit, actually overturned that and created that, said that regular instruction, forced it back into regular instruction, which was the standard in the law. We would ask that that once again be codified within statute so that VA cannot make that change again regulatorily. There's also a standard that VA has put in the regulation that in order to be the higher standard, that a veteran must be unable to self-sustain in the community. We ask that Congress make a little bit of change to that wording, even though it's regulatory language, because currently VA employees don't interpret that correctly. We've asked it to be evaluated multiple times, and what we keep finding is that it continues to be the bane of everyone's existence to get that to that higher level of acceptance. One of the other problems is that folks don't know the options that they have available to them. So if your family caregiver isn't able to perform those duties or needs assistance because, let's say, you're a trades invented veteran who needs 24-hour-a-day care, your caregiver, it is impossible for them to provide 168 hours of care per week. So the best thing to do would be to have VDC care, home health aid, respite care, a combination of such for those hours. What we have found is that there are matrices that VA has in place that govern the amount of hours that you have for GEC programs. Then there are matrices for the hours for PCAFC programs. And then there are matrices that govern how those programs interact together. They, however, apply differently to different generations of caregivers currently. And so it is a confusing maze as to what's available. And to top that all off, those hours differ between different VISNs or regional medical communities within the VA. To go back to an earlier question for just a second, when someone was asking about caregiver wages, There is a mechanism within the VA for your local VA to request, or VISN, to request an increase in home health care workers' reimbursement rates. Most VAs, however, do not know how to engage that mechanism. But one way that you could eliminate or lower the shortage of home health care workers is to increase that reimbursement rate so that more people would be willing to take those jobs. And if you look at the current reimbursement rates around VA, in the state of Alabama, the current reimbursement rates are $30.50 an hour. I'm so sorry.
Just to wrap up
Yep.
on, because we're over time, I'm
Yep,
sorry.
sorry.
Senator Scott, thank you. Thank you. We'll turn next to Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much to our chairman and ranking members for holding this really important hearing today, and I appreciate the testimony from everyone. Mr. Townsend, I want to particularly thank you. Your story was my family's story. My dad was a World War II veteran, diagnosed with MS when I was a young teenager, 7 kids in our family, and our family went through what your family is. So I want to thank you for your service and sacrifice for our country. And I want to thank Lisa for what she, I know, does every single day for your family as well. And tell you, that's why I worked so hard to get the Family Caregivers Act passed personally, because I know what so many people struggle with, and it is a real challenge. And as chairman of the Senate Veterans Committee at the time, I worked really hard to implement it to make sure it actually was in line with what our congressional intent was. So this hearing is really important as we evaluate it now, and what all of you have said to us is really important. Mr. Townsend, you answered Senator Casey a little bit, but just tell me, while the VA continues its review now of this program, what do you think we need to particularly focus on?
Particularly with regard to eligibility for the comprehensive program. Once again, I would go back to my previous statement that the VA's current interpretation of the eligibility criteria and requiring assistance with the performance of activities of daily living each time that activity is performed is unrealistic, and as a result excludes a tremendous number of veterans and caregivers from myself from what otherwise is a very, very valuable resource, a very valuable program.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I totally understand that, and that is really helpful. So again, thank you. Thank you for being here and sharing your story and for what your family's done. I want to turn to Ms. Neekins. Did I say it correctly?
Neeskins.
Neeskins. Thank you. Thank you for what you do for your husband and your family and your community and everything, and being a caregiver. And I wanted to really ask you something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is the high level of stress and depression from caregivers, who I know it's especially true for post 9/11 caregivers. 40% have met criteria for major depressive disorder. That's actually twice the amount as pre-9/11 caregivers and 4 times the rate than that of non-caregivers. That is really a heartbreaking statistic, and I really think it's something we need to focus on. Can you talk a little bit about what services are currently available for caregivers who need mental health treatment and what we need to do to really address that?
Yes, I agree that that is a startling statistic, and I think, that's the reported statistic, but in my experience, just being in the caregiver community, I think that the rate is actually higher than that. One of the things that I think is so important about the PCAFC is the support it does provide to caregivers. There are community functions where they host abilities for caregivers to actually interact with each other, to meet other caregivers, and that allows caregivers to feel less isolated. Being, a caregiver at a young age, I think, is something that most people don't expect. That greatly is in contrast to people who are caring for someone who is geriatric. And we certainly expect people of a certain age to have mobility needs or supervision, protection, and instruction needs. However, to have to care for someone who's in their 20s who has those same needs just is difficult when you're in your 20s yourself. Correct. So that certainly is kind of something that the PCAFC does, attempts to do, is to support caregivers in learning how to become a caregiver and to connect with each other, to provide educational resources. There's also outside foundations like Quality of Life and Elizabeth Dole Foundation, who also provide caregiver communities and resources and educational calls and so on and so forth for these caregivers. But ultimately, they're really, I guess, something that Mr. Townsend spoke to was the CHAMP VA benefit that is allowable if you are a caregiver through PCAFC would be your resource for getting mental health therapy as a caregiver. And if you are just in the program of general care and you do not have a 100% permanently and total disabled person, you do not have access to that CHAMP VA or perhaps that insurance that would allow you to seek those mental health therapists.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's out, but I just want to also mention that something that I personally know well is that 2.3 million children live in a household with a disabled veteran. They provide really unique challenges and responsibilities. And Senator Bozeman and I have a bill called the Helping Heroes Act to help establish a new program to support kids who live with a disabled veteran and give them the support they need. And I hope we all look at that as well. So thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Murray. We'll turn next to Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you for the first time that I know of we've had this joint meeting, and I would say that our witnesses and their testimony are among the most compelling of the many hearings that I've had with veteran issues and aging issues. So thank you. Thank you. I just want to comment, Mr. Skanga, that I share your view. President Biden's most recent budget submission is request $141 million for state home construction grant programs. The current list of projects that's in waiting totals $1.2 billion. So this request barely scratches the surface. And I now face this in my own state as we are waiting for a new construction project in Northeast Kansas. And I just would highlight for the administration and for my colleagues, this not only delays the care for veterans, but puts the state, who is putting money into this project, in a difficult situation planning and financing the project. So, Mr. Skanga, I'm sure many of my colleagues will work to find further resources beyond the President's request for increases in funding of the state home construction grant program. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you.
Let me ask a couple of questions. Ms. Sawyer, I appreciate you working closely with me and Senator Sinema on the Veterans Caregiver Re-Education, Reemployment, and Retirement Act. Tell me why you think, and tell my colleagues why you think it's important for us to consider this legislation and what impact it would have on caregivers' community.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your involvement in creating that act. It is certainly something that has been a long time coming. Most post-9/11 caregivers are in situations where the income in their home is unearned. If their veteran was injured and medically retired, they may receive 100% permanent total VA pay and Social Security disability, as well as the PCAFC caregiver stipend. All of that income is unearned. That means caregivers cannot contribute to Social Security, nor can they contribute to any kind of retirement account. That leaves those caregivers in a very precarious financial state for when their caregiving years end and they reach retirement. The act, the Re-Education, Reemployment, and Retirement Act that you and Senator Sinema introduced would study whether or not Caregivers would be allowed to contribute to Social Security and their retirement accounts, whether there would be a mechanism that could be created for that to take place. It would also allow caregivers who had to leave caregiving either because their veteran passed or they became unable to caregive or their veteran recovered or their veteran had to go into a state home, it would give them $1,000 per caregiver to renew their employment certifications that they lost due to caregiving. And it would also offer them returnships, which already exist for older Americans within the Department of Labor. So if you've watched The Intern, the movie with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, that's a returnship where Robert De Niro returns into the workplace. That would be the returnship program we're looking at caregivers. And so it basically, this bill actually creates a way to secure the financial security for caregivers in their later ages, because as of right now, there is no mechanism for them to be financially secure. Once their veteran passes away, they are looking at being financially destitute in their later years.
Ms. Sawyer, thank you for highlighting that. You're a more effective advocate than when I say those things, and I appreciate you putting this into the record for all of us to hear. Sure. Ms. Beck, please give my regards to Senator Dole. We have two senators that Kansans consider, both of them Kansans, and both Senator Doles used their lives post-Senate career to make a difference in lots of people's lives, and particularly veterans. I'll be at the Eisenhower Presidential Library tomorrow as we take a look at celebrating, recognizing the importance of D-Day and those who served, and certainly Senator Bob Dole in his efforts to recognize World War II veterans on the National Mall, and Senator Elizabeth Dole in her efforts to make sure that our veterans are cared for correctly and appropriately and fully is greatly appreciated in Kansas and across the country. One of the things that there's times that occur in which I just think, how can this happen? How can somebody's bringing me a problem from their veteran perspective, and your reaction is, this can't be true. What is going on here? And one of them is the dismissal of legacy participants in the caregiver program. It's on pause. We're all pleased about that. But would you highlight, Ms. Beck, this position of being in no man's land, no person's land, in which no answers come and we just keep waiting?
Senator, thank you for that question. And I decided a long time ago that the first time I stopped saying, why is this happening, was the first time I shouldn't be doing this anymore. I think Hannah's story probably explains it best, of the emotional, financial uncertainty that has gone along with this program for that legacy cohort of caregivers. There are currently approximately 14,000 individuals who are considered as part of that legacy cohort, and that number is dwindling every day due to, unfortunately, deaths, sometimes improvement, sometimes divorce. And so that number is not extraordinarily high and going down. So the idea of offering grandfathering to that population of people would be to recognize that they have undergone so many different regulation changes. As Ms. Sawyer pointed out, that the program intent somehow shifted from seriously injured to severely injured, and there is a significant concern that a number of those legacy cohort who have been found eligible time and time again would then be removed from the program when the new regulations are issued. And so in recognition of that, and that was something that the Congress has repeatedly said it was not intended, then the idea of grandfathering that population and moving forward and allowing CSP to focus on actually supporting this population rather than the divided conversation of eligibility that has gone on for years would be in their best interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Chairman Casey. I want to talk about some timelines here to flesh out the way it used to be and the way it is now and why. And I'm going to direct my questions to you, Hannah. I understand that the challenge here, or the problem from my perspective, has been that there were regulations published almost 4 years ago, July 31st, 2020, that went into effect October 1 of 2020. You've been taking care of your husband for nearly 20 years. Can you tell me what it was like before those regulations went into effect?
Before the regulations went into effect, I felt supported, and I certainly felt like there was a mechanism within the VA where if I needed additional case management or support for Kelly's needs, I knew who to call and who to ask, and I had assurances that I would be able to navigate his care successfully. Once those regulations passed and we were dismissed from the caregiver program, as Senator Moran expressed, we feel like we're in a purgatory situation here where we just don't know what the next iteration of these regulations will look like.
So for further explanation, a regulation was put into effect October 1st of 2020. Nothing changed with your husband. His needs remained the same and potentially even got greater because they're getting older.
Correct.
And yet, you were removed from the program because of a reassessment?
That is correct.
And that reassessment was required by the new regulation?
Yes, that is correct.
And were you able to appeal that assessment?
Yes. We appealed and we received a letter which basically stated that it was unnecessary to appeal because currently everything was on pause. The entire program was being put on pause to
And the
determine what
pause
to do.
wasn't pre-regulation, the pause was post-regulation.
Correct.
Okay. So tell me what that impact had on your family, the impact of losing that certainty that the caregiver program gave you before October 1 of 2020.
Right.
What impact did that have on your family? What impact did that have on you and your husband and your children?
Right. So basically, it creates a large sense of uncertainty. What does the future look like? Because if this resource for all of these caregivers, including myself, is going away, what replaces it? I don't know. I don't have those answers. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to fathom how to meet Kelly's needs in the future.
Financially, what did it do to you?
So that would mean that I would lose the caregiver stipend, which means that a significant portion of our income is simply going away.
Thank you for that. And it is my understanding that the new regulations are there and just haven't been released. That's correct. I see a head nod. That's good enough. Thank you. I want to go over to you, Meredith. Appreciate your comment that we've got some really good bills that actually get things done and get hung up for because of politics of the day. You're spot on, and quite frankly, it ain't right. Good policy is good policy regardless of political party and regardless of who's carrying it, and we ought to look at it from that standpoint. I want you to take a moment to summarize, because you are intimately familiar with the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act. And I want you to summarize and particularly highlight why this bill is so important for our nation's caregivers. And if you could refer it back to some of the challenges that Hannah just explained, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir. Just to be clear, you prefer the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act and the package, or just the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act? Yes, sir.
Well,
Yes, sir.
my mic works. Keep it simple.
The Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act, as I mentioned, has probably most importantly for the most severely injured and most ill is the provision on removal of the cap. And that is, I have caregivers who are watching right now who are waiting every single day to ensure that they are able to get the services that they need in the home to keep the veterans that they care for in their home. Those are going to be the individuals who have long-term ALS, MS, severe traumatic brain injuries. And without the removal of that cap, to which everyone seems to agree, including the VA, that they will potentially have to move to a nursing home because that cap prevents them from getting the care and services inside their home. Also included in the legislation is the requirement that veteran-directed program be within every VA medical facility, because that program, in addition, can actually help to support a lot of those caregivers who may not qualify for PCAFC for one reason or another, because you are actually allowed to pay your family caregiver under that program. that is significantly helpful for those who care for an individual who have cognitive disabilities or mental health disabilities that at the moment may or may not qualify for PCAFC, and gives them the flexibility and control of who they're hiring in their home, because often veterans with those conditions don't want somebody who's unfamiliar in their home. And so you're able to hire a friend or family to do that. The other provisions in the legislation include mandating that the other programs within the VA that provide those care services, home health aides, home-based primary care, are mandated to stay within the VA, because while those are a little bit more widely available than veteran-directed, as we've seen with PCAFC, there is a concern if it's not legislated, it can be taken away.
Thank you very much for
Yes,
that
sir.
explanation, and I appreciate all of your testimonies.
Thank you, Chairman Tester. I'll turn next to Senator Ricketts.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There are over 16.2 million veterans living with the U.S., including 111,000 that are calling Nebraska their home. And these brave women and men have made great sacrifices for our country when they put on the uniform, and I'm committed to making sure they've got quality benefits and care that they've earned. That's why I introduced the Tax Cuts for Veterans Act. The bill would make military retirement pay tax-free at the federal level, just like we did it in Nebraska, where we made it tax-free. Furthermore, across the country, there are more than 6.5 million veterans and military caregivers who provide $14 billion in unpaid labor for America's wounded warriors every year. Family and others who provide care for veterans spend on average $11,500 of their personal income in out-of-pocket expenses and related to the caregiving of their veterans every year, which is roughly about 1.5 times higher than what other family caregivers spend. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs offers support and resources for caregivers of veterans enrolled in VA healthcare through the VA Caregiver Support Program. This program provides caregivers with the access to VA health benefit or healthcare benefits, caregiver education, financial aid, mental health services, and up to 30 days of respite care. But only 34% of veterans have used their earned benefits at VA healthcare. Ms. Sawyer, over 33% of Nebraskans veterans live in rural areas that can create unique challenges for those veterans and their caregivers. Do the VA Caregivers programs offer any resources that specifically help veterans and caregivers living in rural communities? And if so, how do they provide support that addresses the unique challenges that those veterans face?
Thank you for the question. So in rural areas, as with caregivers who are in urban areas and that can't get out of the home, there is or there are mental health programs that are virtual programs that have been put in place by PCAFC. So if you are a member of the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, you now have access to therapy virtually through that PCAFC program. You also have options for respite care in home or in facility if they can find a home health aide caregiver, that being the concern. What I was saying earlier is in rural areas where it's difficult to find home health care workers, there are mechanisms in place where VA can raise that reimbursement rate, which would make it more attractive and possibly make health care workers more widely available in rural areas. Because as Hannah said, trying to get someone to come across the Continental Divide for $13 an hour is rather daunting. But in South Dakota, they've managed to raise the reimbursement rate to $85.05 an hour, where in Alabama it's $30.50 an hour. So if your VAs are able to raise that reimbursement rate, you would have better access to those home health care workers. Also, it's difficult sometimes for caregivers and veterans to travel to VA facilities, so certainly community care makes sense. The concern then is for the Program of Comprehensive Assistance is that those records need to be able to get into VA medical records, which is what we see is keeping people from being accepted into the program. It's not that there is a lack of need for assistance of the veteran, there is a lack of evidence of a need of assistance. And that's partly because those outside records never get into the VA, or the practitioners aren't asked about the specific needs of the veteran. What's examined in PCAFC in that evaluation process is not actually ever asked about during your yearly exam. Your PCM never evaluates you for ADL or supervision and protection needs. Those are usually done by specialists. And most of the time you see your specialist in your community rather than traveling 200 miles or 400 miles in the case of Hannah and her husband in Montana. And so you have to have that mechanism to get those records in. At Quality of Life, we actually issue a questionnaire to specialists that would actually document those needs and then have that submitted to the VA by the veteran and caregiver. So one of those things is really getting that documentation into the VA.
And so is that really relying on the veteran then for asking that, or is there another way to make sure that that kind of information can be captured when they go see those specialists?
So there is a duty to assist that exists within VBA, and we have worked with Dr. Richardson and her team to really train her team on duty to assist within VHA. It would be helpful if Congress could codify duty to assist in the Veterans Health Administration, which would mean that if a veteran and caregiver identify that there are outside medical records that need to be obtained for the evaluation process, it is VA's responsibility to get those records so that they may be considered in that process. And so while Dr. Richardson has trained her staff to do that, it is by sheer force of will and leadership power that she gets her team to do that. But that actually doesn't necessarily exist within VHA itself.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. We'll turn next to Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's an unspoken theme to this hearing as it has unfolded, and that is implementation is as important as vision. We deal in laws up here, but the majority of what you've been talking about today has been implementation of the laws. We can pass great laws, but if they're not adequately implemented, it ain't going to work. And one of the best examples, Mr. Kanga, you may know about this, 3.5 years ago, we passed a law about domiciliary care at state veterans' homes, and we're still waiting for the regulations 3.5 years later. And in the meantime, our veterans' homes in Maine are losing something like $3 million a year based upon the lack of having this back payment and the implementation. Tomorrow is the anniversary of D-Day, and I've mentioned this before in this committee. I like to remind people when they tell me how long things are going to take that Eisenhower retook Europe in 11 months. We should not be waiting years for regulations to implement the laws that we pass here. So I hope that can be a theme, Mr. Chairman, of this committee. Not that the VA is, they're bad people or they're trying not to enforce the laws, but somehow we have to break through the delays and the sort of sometimes the nonsensical, such as what you endured, Hannah, implementation, because one of the other themes here is home care is A, preferred, and B, cheaper. We should be encouraging it. Mr. Townsend, I presume you would rather be at home than in a hospital or a nursing home.
That's absolutely correct.
And the care that you're receiving, even at an adequate reimbursement rate, is still a lot cheaper than what it would be in one of those institutions. Isn't that correct?
That's also correct, sir.
My mother used to use the term penny wise and pound foolish. So I guess it must be an English term. In our case, it would be penny wise and dollar foolish. But this is a case where we're nickel and diming on what is a much, much lower cost alternative. Is that not correct? This is the big picture as I see it. Ms. Beck, sure.
Yes, sir. It is. These are human beings, first of all. And as you said, the care in the home is causing, in most cases, better outcomes, whether better health outcomes or better quality of life. And from the perspective of cost savings, the idea, as has been pointed out previously, that the PCAFC program has higher standards to become a part of than the more expensive Homemaker Home Health program.
I appreciate that. I'm going to cut you off because
Yes, sir.
We're out of time. I've got this little digital thing that tells me how many seconds I have left. Another example is, Mr. Scanger, the recent CMS rules about staffing ratios. HRSA indicates by next year we'll have a 78,000 nurse shortage in this country, and yet CMS is issuing rules for increasing staffing when there's nobody to hire. And I know in Maine, we're losing 4 nursing homes so far this year, 1 this week. We've lost 26 in the last 10 years because mostly lack of staff. So these well-meaning regulations, nobody's against adequate staffing levels, but the well-meaning regulations will end up with less care if we lose nursing home beds. Mr. Scanger, do you agree?
Well said, Senator King. I think it's a big problem and something we should be looking at nationwide. We think for just skilled nursing facilities alone, we're going to be lacking about 102,000 registered nurses and certified nursing assistants just to meet that.
And just because CMS passes a regulation doesn't mean those nurses are going to magically spring into existence.
That is correct. That is correct.
Let the record show that you said, well stated, Mr. King, Senator King. I just want to emphasize that. But this is a very serious problem. I mean, we're losing caregiver, and what compounds it is, the caregivers who are staying are being burnt out because they're having to work so many hours. So we really should be, CMS ought to really be talking about how do we surge people into this industry, not requiring staffing levels that are going to end up with not lesser care, but no care for veterans and elderly people throughout the country.
Just one quick example. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I lost 36 caregivers in a single day on September 28th, 2021, and that was due to the vaccine mandate. We had to think quick on our feet at the Long Island State Veterans Home. We came up with a new provider caregiver title of unit assistant. These are people who are not certified nursing assistants but can do many of the tasks of the CNAs with the exception of toileting and bathing. It was great. It worked out well for us. They made a little bit less than a certified nurse assistant, and we found plenty of people to fill this particular role. The sad part for us as an institution is that we got no credit whatsoever from CMS in terms of the payroll-based journal and the fact that we had an alternate type of caregiver to provide the care, to be the hands-on, to do things like feeding the residents, helping them get dressed, helping make their beds, helping transfer them around the facility. So we were able, as a state veterans home program, to come up with the bodies to provide the care, but sadly CMS did not recognize this kind of caregiver, and when it came to the metrics of providing a certain amount of providers per resident, they were not counted.
I think we should move CMS out of Washington into Poughkeepsie or Bozeman, Montana, or someplace so they know what's actually going on the ground. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. We'll turn next to Senator Hassan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you and Chairman Tester and Ranking Members Moran and Braun for this hearing. To all of our witnesses, not only thank you for being here today, but thank you for the extraordinary work you do in your advocacy, and not only for our country's veterans, but for the people who take care of our country's veterans. It's really important and critical work, obviously. Mr. Townsend, I just wanted to start with a question to you, and I want to thank you for your service in the Army, for your years of work as a physician's assistant, and for your advocacy. The recent FAA Reauthorization Act that President Biden signed into law included a provision that I authored that will expand access to universal changing stations in airport restrooms. These changing stations will provide individuals who experience disabilities and their caregivers with a safer and more dignified travel experience. I want to extend a special thank you to the Paralyzed Veterans of America and Disabled American Veterans for their support of this provision. They really helped get it across the finish line. But Mr. Townsend, can you speak to the importance of making travel more accessible for individuals experiencing disabilities and how it helps them participate more fully?
With regard to travel, the primary obstacle that I face since I've become a full-time wheelchair user in the community is distance.
Yeah.
Since becoming a wheelchair user, I'm reluctant to consider flying.
Yeah.
Therefore, I only travel by ground. I've heard the horror stories from many others about what's happened to their wheelchairs during
Yep.
travel. And I can't imagine the frustration of getting to your destination only to have essentially your legs taken away from you.
Yeah.
So.
No, I appreciate that, and that's another issue that we're working on and tried to address. I just think a lot of people aren't aware that the lack of access to universal changing rooms can be a real barrier for people with disabilities and their caregivers. Ms. Beck, I want to thank you for a lot of the work of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and thank you for the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act, which I'm a co-sponsor of and very proud to work with you on. In your testimony, you touched on the financial strains experienced by caregivers, especially families of veterans who aren't associated with the VA or who have difficulty accessing VA programs. The Credit for Caring Act, which has bipartisan support, would help relieve some of these financial strains by providing tax cuts to family caregivers who also hold down another job, which is a pretty frequent situation. Can you discuss some of the financial strains that caregivers might face and how these costs impact them and the people who they care for?
Sure, thank you very much. There essentially would be two populations probably involved in that question, and it would be those veterans who are associated with the VA and those who are not.
Yeah.
So for veterans who are associated with the VA, there are any number of programs and services that could potentially reimburse or pay for needed supplies. However, one, as we've discussed earlier, accessing information about that, knowing about that, having the time to be able to do that is incredibly difficult. So veterans and caregivers often pay out of pocket, even if they are associated with the VA, for sometimes for specially adapted, something as large as specially adapted housing modifications, or something as small as Tylenol, Advil, gauze, anything else along those lines. Outside of the, for those not affiliated with the VA, they would obviously be then responsible for those out-of-pocket expenses writ large. And so we are very much strong supporters of S3702, that Credit for Caring Act, because of those out-of-pocket expenses that they have to pay for.
Well, I appreciate that. I also just want to note that there are caregivers who work part-time jobs as opposed to full-time jobs, so they're earning less as they're also trying to take on this additional work and these additional expenses. Last question, and it is for you again, Ms. Beck. It's really important that we obviously support people with disabilities in their homes and for being as independent as they can be. And we have talked a lot today about the workforce shortage here. We face a shortage of professionals who provide critical services for individuals with disabilities, including direct support professionals who can assist with communication, daily tasks, provide job support, and respite to family caregivers. My colleagues and I have been working to make sure we have the information we need to support these professionals in the work they do, most recently getting DOL to adopt a job category for direct support professionals so we can actually track how many of them we have. And I just want my colleagues to know how important these people are. I have an adult son with severe disabilities. We have been blessed with a direct support professional who's been with him 35 of his 36 years and has just been extraordinary. These are people who are creative, hardworking, make a huge difference, can provide respite care, and can help people be independent. So, Ms. Beck, what else can Congress do to strengthen support services for people with disabilities in the caregiving workforce?
One, thank you for that legislation, because we've all talked about the shortage issues, and we can't do anything about it until you actually have data that shows where they are and what is necessary. Increasing those reimbursement rates, as has been mentioned, you know, a lot of these people will do this out of the goodness of their hearts, but there are a lot of people who, and most people, are going to need to be employed and paid at an adequate rate in order to provide the service that's necessary.
Right.
And so the reimbursement rates, as was mentioned earlier, especially within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the varying knowledge of the mechanisms by which you can increase those reimbursement rates. Because while certainly the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is supporting family caregivers, they also rely on those direct support professionals in order to provide the services that you mentioned. And so this workforce is incredibly important to us as we are trying to make sure that everyone has the services they need in order to stay in their homes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Next, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Ms. Sawyer. So, Ms. Sawyer, one of the most sacred promises that our country makes is to care for our service members when they return home. And I'm committed to making sure that our country keeps these promises. And that includes ensuring that our veterans' family caregivers have the support they need to care for their loved ones. And I've heard from Arizona veteran families that they were removed from the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers during the expansion rollout. And they had previously qualified, in some cases, for years for this program. So while I'm glad that the VA has suspended the reassessments and the discharges for legacy participants, I'm troubled that some of the folks who are disqualified still do not have an expedited appeals process. This is an important issue that's impacting Arizona's veterans and also their families. And I've continued to urge the VA to fix this. So, Ms. Sawyer, can you please share your experience with the changes to this program, the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers?
Thank you, Senator. In the beginning, when the program was first created, the only appeals that were available were clinical appeals, and they were governed under VA's regular clinical appeal guidance. When the new regulations were written for the Mission Act in 2020, those appeals, clinical appeals, shifted to the centralized eligibility assessment team that was created. With the Beaudet court decision, it opened up multiple more avenues for appeal. So the VHA was forced to create supplemental claims, higher level review claims, which all occur under VHA, and then there was an avenue opened up for Board of Veterans Appeals claims. None of those had existed prior to the Beaudet case. Also, because decisions had been governed under regular clinical appeals in the VA do not require justification. They simply can be listed as approved or denied. And so in the with the Beaudet decision, VA did undertake an effort to do an 8-point letter, so now we know.
Can you
why
describe what the
people are denied.
Beaudet decision was?
Sure. The Beaudet decision was a court decision that basically said, where basically a veteran and his spouse sued the VA to say, you said we weren't eligible for the program, but we don't really know why, because the letter that you sent us doesn't tell us why, and we don't have rights to appeal that we would in other situations. And so the Beaudet decision then created those extra avenues for appeals, and it created the need for the 8-point letter. So the 8-point letter is a letter that a veteran gets that is basically mirrors a process that's within the VBA, or the Veterans Benefits Administration, that explains exactly why a veteran is denied. So with the setting up of the supplemental claims and higher level reviews, this was something unique to VHA that they had never done before. And so that's kind of what has taken so long. Originally, VA had to completely set up a process. VHA had to completely set up a process they had never been involved in. And then they had to write regulations, write directives, everything administrative that VA does. Then they had to train a staff how to do that. In the meantime, they were already accepting those appeals, but weren't able to act on them. So it took them, they were accepting appeals for between 12 and 18 months before they could actually act on them. They are actually acting on them now for supplemental claims and higher level reviews. And so we are starting to see some decisions come out of there. One of the things with Quality of Life Foundation we do, though, is to say, if you had supplemental information that should have been available at the time of your original denial, while we'd urge you to go ahead and submit a supplemental claim, we also want you to, if you've been denied from the beginning, want you to go ahead and submit a new application using all of that evidence so we can go ahead and get you in the program with that extra information, while at the same time your supplemental claim runs, which would then, if you were accepted under your new application, you would be back paid from your supplemental claim from the approval of your new application back to your date of your original application. However, there is a little bit of a narrow window that if that information that we consider supplemental should have been available at your first review, you can actually file it as a clinical appeal and have your appeal acted on within 30 days. That would actually get you back paid to your original application. And recently, we've just at Quality of Life had that happen with a veteran. Actually, he was an Arizona veteran, and we got him back paid all the way to his denial in 2021 because they had never contacted his specialist.
Ms. Sawyer, I'm way over, but do you feel this is moving in the right direction?
I feel it's moving in the right direction, but slowly.
Slowly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Chair Casey, and my thanks to you and Senator Tester for holding this important hearing today. First Lady Rosalind Carter, a great Georgian, used to say that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world. She said that there are those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Yet our caregiving infrastructure is falling short for too many, including our veterans. The VA boasts generous caregiving programs for veterans and their families. Grateful for the work that happens there, but 2 of our witnesses today confronted challenges with one federal program intended to financially support caregivers of injured veterans, the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, or the PCAFC. Ms. Neeskens, I am deeply sorry to hear about your husband's grueling experiences with the PCAFC reassessment process. You are the human face of the public policy issues that we're trying to address, and it's important that we center the families that undergo this, the veterans in this work. So tell me, how can the VA improve the reassessment process so veterans won't have to experience the turmoil you and Kelly faced?
The regulatory changes that were implemented, which required ADL assistance each and every time, and supervision, protection, and instruction assistance at a rate of continuous daily care, were exclusionary, and therefore needs such as my husband has for neurogenic bowel and seizure care and things like that, while those are very serious and require constant care, regular care, they are episodic. And therefore, because of that, the nature of the disability itself, they were unable to meet the standard of each and every time and continuous daily care. And so that language is problematic and should be changed.
Thank you so much. Again, you're the human face. It's public policy. Regulations often don't match where people actually live. And so we have to be very intentional about getting it right. Mr. Townsend, thank you for your service and for being here today as a witness. Like Ms. Neeskens, you and your wife encountered barriers to receiving caregiving support. Can you talk about your experience getting connected to assistance after the VA denied your application for PCAFC?
After we were denied access to the comprehensive program, fortunately, we were still able to access most of the benefits. Lisa has since been enrolled in the general program of caregiver assistance, and we're able to participate in benefits such as respite care. We really haven't had. Put it this way: the main benefit of the comprehensive program is the benefit of, at least for me, is the availability of medical insurance coverage through CHAMP VA. The other benefit, obviously, is the financial support through the stipend. We can live without the stipend, but what made it possible for my wife to retire early and become my full-time caregiver was that availability of CHAMP VA. And in our case, since we were denied access through the comprehensive program, fortunately for us, because of the 100% permanent and total nature of my disability rating, we were able to access that benefit through other means, not through the caregiver program itself.
So you were not automatically connected to the caregiver program?
That's true, sir. It's interesting that as we went through the process of the application of the comprehensive program, in our meetings with, for example, the social worker at the hospital, she explained to us that if we were denied access to the comprehensive program, we still would be able to access the benefits through the general program. We assumed that that transition from the comprehensive program to the general program would be almost automatic if we were denied access to the comprehensive program, but come to find out that's not the case. It was only later, when I contacted the staff at the VA in Wilkes-Barre, that we realized that Lisa was not formally enrolled in the basic or general caregiver program. She is now, but it was not an automatic transition. So whatever the committees can do to work with the VA to ensure a more seamless transition between the comprehensive program and the general caregiver program, if you're denied access to the comprehensive program, would be of tremendous benefit. Thank you.
So you both paint a picture of a fractured system where the constituent parts do not talk seamlessly to one another. And so clearly there's room for improvement in addressing the need for continuity of care, making sure veterans don't fall between the tracks. But thank you so very much for your witness and your testimony. I think brings this kind of issue into clear focus and helps us to see the work that we've got to do. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. We'll turn to Senator Cassidy.
Thank you all. You know, I'm a physician. You'll see that reflected. You can tell that Warnock, as a pastor, he went over. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, we had a lot of overs today.
A lot of overs. Well, that's good. It's an important topic. I thank you for doing that. I am a physician, Mr. Townsend. I noted that you had said that in your testimony, if people have already asked my questions, I apologize. I've been running around. This is my sixth thing I've done today. So I apologize for not hearing what their answers were. But you spoke about your ineligibility for the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers because your 100% service-related disability didn't require assistance each time the activity is performed. Now, I'm a physician, not a neurologist, but I remember from med school that MS waxes and wanes. And so there's other conditions which wax and wane. So tell me, how's that played? Is that still an issue? What's the way to approach the VA regarding this?
Thank you very much for that question. You're absolutely correct that medical conditions like mine, like multiple sclerosis, is often associated with symptoms that tend to wax and wane. Can be severe on certain occasions and less severe. That's certainly been my experience with the condition, and I'm confident that there are many other veterans out there in similar circumstances. As we talked about earlier, the VA's current requirement that the veteran require assistance with the performance of certain activities of daily living each time or every time that activity is performed is restrictive and has excluded not only myself, but I'm sure many other veterans like me from participation in this very valuable program.
So is there a solution to propose? And Ms. Sawyer, I see you nodding your head.
Yes, sir. One of the solutions would be that you remove, that VA removes each and every time from the language of the regulation. But one of our requests has been that Congress actually codify that it needs to be regular assistance with ADLs, because it was, in the regulation, it was regular assistance with the ADLs until VA reinterpreted the regulation.
Oh, I see.
And so we would like, that's why we would like to ask Congress to codify that language.
Now, let me ask you, was there an issue with fraud? Why did they reinterpret?
VA made a move in 2017 to, what they said was to realign the program with other VA geriatrics and extended care programs. Unfortunately, what they did was make this program actually even harder to get into than those other programs. There were actually not, there is this rampant rumor and anecdote that there is a lot of fraud within this program. There has not been proven to be a lot of fraud within this program. Has there been some? Sure, just like you see in every VA program, but it is not rampant like it was, like it has been suggested. The one way that I would be curious to talk to Mr. Townsend about that you can get around the each and every time standard is that if a veteran then needs supervision with those activities of daily living, they can be those ADLs can be considered under supervision, protection, and instruction. But in the beginning, a lot of VA staffers were not trained to look at it that way under this new regulation. So I would be curious to know if he ever appealed and had it looked at through the lens of
Okay,
supervision,
I'm going to make that a
protection,
question
and
for the
instruction.
record, just because I want to ask Ms. Beck something.
Absolutely.
Ms. Beck, I had coffee with a woman who's now my age, 66, but I remember when she was 17. And so, and a lot of it happens in the interim. And one of the things that's happened is that she has a son who's been mentally ill, and he's now 40, diagnosed when he was 27. And it was, she said at some points, she just felt like giving up. Just like, oh, I can't do it. We can feel that, right? And you mentioned here the issue of support for the supporter. So if you had to put your finger on the critical gaps in mental health services for the caregivers, where would your finger land?
Sir, thank you for that question. And yes, it is a significant problem that we have seen quite a bit of at the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. And I think that one of the major things we recommended in our testimony just to start to impact that problem is that, it's been great that PCAFC was able to now offer mental health services for those who are eligible for that program, but that's a small minority of the population. In our testimony, we recommended that it be expanded to those in the general program as well, to at least, again, take a larger bite at the apple of addressing that. I do think also that, we can also try to remove some of the burden that is felt by those caregivers by addressing some of the care coordination issues that are rampant, speaking of things that are rampant within the VA. In almost every case that I have run into in years of doing this and those with the foundation, lack of care coordination has been at the root of the problem for both the veteran and the caregiver. And the amount of time that the caregiver has to spend in navigating those services and the frustration and the anger of consistently having to repeat and prove your issues and the needs is weighing very heavily on both caregivers and veterans themselves.
So my friend, she said, every year I have to go and reestablish that it's true that my son has been disabled from mental illness for 20 years. It's like, why? Now, I get you recover from some things, but there's some things you do not recover from. So it does seem like we could make some distinctions of that in our law. I got to apologize to Warnock. I went over longer than did he. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Senator Cassidy, thank you for your questions. I'll just have one question before we wrap up, and I really appreciate the testimony of all of our witnesses. I wanted to go back to you, Mr. Townsend. You're a retired physician assistant and someone who's deeply engaged with other veterans in your community through the Paralyzed Veterans of America and volunteering at the local VA Medical Center, Wilkes-Barre. But even with your extensive knowledge of the healthcare system and your veteran connections, you had to, quote, self-educate, unquote, on the VA benefits that were available to you. Multiple veterans organizations have said they receive no direct outreach from the VA about the Caregiver Support Program. Often veterans seem to have heard of the program from a veteran service organization or from a fellow veteran, not from the VA. I'm concerned that this haphazard approach, and that might be an understatement, this haphazard approach to outreach will leave too many families that are eligible in the dark about the Caregiver Support Program. Veterans and their caregivers deserve to know when there's a program that can provide them with the support. So I'd ask you, how did you find out about the Caregiver Support Program? That's number one. And number two is, how do you think veterans who are not healthcare experts or connected to other veterans, as you are, can find out about these programs and how to navigate them?
The haphazard approach that you described, Senator Casey, certainly has been my personal experience. Most of what I learned was through a process of self-education, by talking to fellow veterans, by working with veteran service organizations like PVA, by looking at online resources. And some of those online resources, in fact, are produced by the VA. But it's interesting that one of the things that seemed common sense to me, because I agree with you that the VA medical system can be intimidating, even for somebody with healthcare experience. But one of the first things I thought of that would occur would be that particularly when you're new in the system, that you'd have an opportunity to sit down with maybe a social worker at the VA, and they'd explain to you the benefits that you're eligible for. But that certainly was not my experience. So if I could make one recommendation, it would simply be for the VA to better educate the beneficiaries of their care of all the services that are currently available to them, because that communication of information, I think, often doesn't occur, at least not in the way that it should.
Well, that's a reasonable proposal. We need a few of those around here. But I wanted to close with a statement, and we'll wrap up. And all of you have been very patient with your time and your experience and your expertise, and we appreciate you being here with us. As we heard today from our witnesses, the VA's Caregiver Support Program is a vital and life-changing benefit for so many families, but too many veterans are not able to get the benefits that they have earned and that they and their families deserve. Our service members and veterans put their lives on the line every day to ensure that America remains the land of the free. We rely on their commitment, and when they are wounded or when they are injured or ill, they need our support and they need our commitment. With 5.5 million military caregivers in the United States, it is imperative we do everything we can to support the critical workers providing family and other paid caregiving. As one family in Pittston, Pennsylvania, right near my hometown of Scranton, shared in a statement for the record for today's hearing, quote, "If our son TJ, who lost his eyes and 1/3 of his brain in service to our country, if he is disqualified, then we are left wondering who truly qualifies for these services," unquote. We must do more to provide support to veterans and caregivers so that they can do their work and are supported fully in the process. We need to provide easier and clearer access to information about the caregiving and long-term care services and support that the VA offers, as well as easier navigation and support in the application process. As we heard from Mr. Townsend, veterans shouldn't have to rely upon word of mouth to find out about these life-changing benefits. We also need to make sure that the VA has the resources that it needs, including a strong, stable workforce to provide veterans with the best and most efficient care, including caregiver support services. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to address the needs of our millions of veterans and their family members who are in need of long-term care. I know we'll have a number of statements for the record for this hearing, I should say closing statements for the record for the hearing, and we'll enter those into the record at the appropriate time. I want to once again thank all of our witnesses for contributing their time and their expertise today. I will be entering, and I'm just holding up a folder containing 5 written statements for the record. These are from Pennsylvania veterans who receive long-term care services and support from the VA or who are enrolled in the family caregiving program. Lastly, if any senators have additional questions for the record, for witnesses or statements to be added to the record, the hearing record will be kept open for 7 days until next Wednesday, June the 12th. Thank you all for participating today, and this concludes our hearing.